Welcome to Stamps Us, the channel where we explore rare American stamps, historic postal treasures, and the fascinating stories behind valuable pieces of philately. Today we are looking at an extraordinary United States stamp from the early 20th century, the 1902 $2 James Madison stamp. At first glance, this stamp may look like nothing more than an old piece of blue paper, but this particular issue is one of the most interesting high-denomination stamps from the classic United States period. The stamp features James Madison, the fourth President of the United States, surrounded by an elaborate engraved design, with the $2 denomination displayed prominently on both sides. This was not an ordinary everyday stamp because $2 represented a significant amount of money in the early 1900s. And high-denomination stamps were primarily intended for larger postal payments and heavier correspondence. That makes surviving examples especially interesting to collectors today. The 1902 $2 Madison is cataloged as Scott number 312, and its value can change dramatically depending on condition. An ordinary example should not automatically be considered a $1,000 stamp because faults, poor centering, cancellations, gum condition, perforations, and repairs can greatly reduce value. However, exceptional examples can become extremely valuable. One remarkable certified example with extraordinary centering and margins sold for approximately $11,000 at auction. That is an important reminder that condition can completely transform the value of an old stamp. Collectors carefully examine the perforations around the edges, the margins, the color, the quality of the engraved impression, the original gum on unused examples, and any signs of damage or restoration. A stamp that is beautifully centered with original gum and excellent color can be worth dramatically more than a similar stamp with heavy cancellation, stains, creases, tears, or disturbed gum. The stamp shown in this video is therefore a fascinating piece of American postal history, but an exact value cannot be determined from a photograph alone. If you discover one of these stamps in an old family album, inherited collection, envelope, or box of forgotten stamps, do not clean it or try to remove it from its original paper. Even a small mistake can damage an old stamp and reduce its collector value. Instead, place it safely in a proper archival holder and have it examined by a qualified philatelic expert if it appears to be in exceptional condition. For serious collectors, the most exciting possibility is finding a high-grade example with strong original characteristics or a rare variety. This is why old stamps should never be judged only by the denomination printed on them. A $2 stamp from 1902 can be a beautiful historical collectible, and in exceptional condition it can become a major philatelic treasure. If you enjoy discovering rare stamps and learning about their history and market values, make sure you subscribe to Stamps Us, because there are always more forgotten stamps waiting to be discovered. Remember, before selling an old stamp, always identify it correctly, compare genuine auction records, and consider professional certification when the potential value is significant. This little blue stamp carries more than a $2 denomination. It carries a piece of American history, and under the right circumstances, it can also carry a surprisingly impressive collector value. Next up, we are traveling all the way back to 1861 to examine one of the classic United States stamps featuring George Washington, the 3-cent Washington stamp commonly identified as Scott number 65. This is a fascinating stamp because it comes from the Civil War era, making it more than 160 years old today. The stamp features a detailed engraved portrait of George Washington surrounded by an elegant frame, and examples are commonly found in the rose color associated with this issue. But here is where the story becomes much more interesting. Not every Scott 65 has the same value. An ordinary used example may sell for only a few dollars, while a well-preserved mint example can bring hundreds of dollars. And rare varieties or extraordinary multiples can be worth thousands or even dramatically more. Auction records demonstrate just how wide the range can be. A certified mint never-hinged example has sold for hundreds of dollars, while a superb specialized variety known as a printed on both sides example has reached an astonishing $110,000. Another rare imperforate variety has sold for $15,000. These extraordinary prices are not for ordinary examples. They are for rare varieties and exceptional pieces with strong documentation and certification. This is one of the most important lessons in stamp collecting. Two stamps that look almost identical can have completely different values because of a tiny printing difference that may be difficult to notice without magnification. Collectors therefore examine the perforations, margins, color, cancellation, gum, paper, printing characteristics, and possible varieties very carefully. The centering is also extremely important because stamps from this period are often found with uneven margins. A beautifully centered stamp with 4 clear margins can be far more desirable than a similar example that is badly centered. The cancellation can also influence value, especially when it is a rare fancy cancel or an unusual historical postal marking. Some documented fancy cancellations on this issue have brought hundreds or even more than $1,000. If you have an old 3-cent Washington stamp, do not immediately assume it is either worthless or worth a fortune. The correct identification comes first. Look at the design, color, perforations, and overall condition, and then compare it with a reliable catalog or professional reference. If you believe you have an unusual variety, avoid touching the gum and never attempt to straighten, clean, or repair the stamp yourself. Professional certification can be extremely important when a stamp may have significant value. The 1861 3-cent Washington is especially fascinating because it connects stamp collecting with one of the most important periods in American history. Every surviving example has a story, whether it traveled across the country on an ordinary letter, carried an unusual cancellation, or survived as a rare mint example in an old collection. So if you find one of these stamps in your family albums, antique documents, or inherited collection, take a second look. That tiny 3-cent stamp could be an ordinary collectible, or it could contain a rare variety that collectors are willing to pay serious money to acquire. Next up, we are examining one of the most historically fascinating stamps in our collection, the 1863 St. Andrew Jackson stamp from the Confederate States of America, commonly known by collectors as the Red Jack. This stamp is especially important because it comes from the American Civil War period and represents the postal history of the Confederate States. The design features Andrew Jackson in profile, surrounded by an ornate frame, and the stamp is printed in a distinctive brown-red color. It is cataloged as Confederate States Scott No. 8. Unlike many modern stamps that were produced in enormous quantities, stamps from the Confederate period are highly interesting because of their historical context, production methods, postal use, condition, and surviving examples. The Red Jack was an imperforate stamp, meaning it was issued without perforated holes around the edges, so collectors pay close attention to the margins. A stamp with large, balanced margins can be much more desirable than an example that has been cut very close to the design. Condition is extremely important, and authenticity is even more important because Confederate stamps are a specialized field of collecting. Auction records show that ordinary genuine used examples can sell for amounts ranging from tens or hundreds of dollars, while exceptional mint examples, rare multiples, and important postal history usages can command significantly more. One auction example of Scott No. 8 with very attractive margins and a Richmond cancellation realized $150, while other examples have sold for several $100s. A spectacular certified mint never-hinged example with extremely high grading was estimated around $1,000 to $1,500, showing how dramatically quality can change the value of this stamp. Special covers and unusual postal usages can also be very desirable. In one auction, an unusual Confederate cover bearing Scott No. 8 sold for several $100s. This is why collectors should never look only at the printed to cent denomination. The historical story behind the stamp can be just as important as the paper itself. When examining a possible Red Jack, collectors should look at the margins, color, paper, gum, cancellation, printing characteristics, and overall condition. Any signs of trimming, repairs, thinning, creases, stains, or alterations can affect the value. If the stamp appears to be genuine and in strong condition, professional expertization is highly recommended before making an important purchase or sale. A genuine Confederate stamp from the Civil War era is already an incredible historical object, but a rare variety, exceptional condition, or important postal history connection can make it considerably more valuable. Imagine holding a small piece of paper that was produced during one of the most dramatic periods in American history. That is what makes the Red Jack so fascinating to collectors. It is not simply an old to-cent stamp. It is a surviving piece of Civil War postal history. So if you discover one in an inherited album or an old collection, do not throw it away and do not attempt to clean it. Protect it, identify it carefully, and seek expert advice if you believe it could be genuine. Next up, we are taking a close look at a beautiful 1892 cent George Washington stamp. This classic United States stamp is an excellent example of why collectors should never judge an old stamp simply by its face value. The stamp features George Washington in a detailed engraved portrait and was issued during the classic banknote era of American philately. It is commonly identified as Scott number 220, and although ordinary examples can be relatively affordable, special varieties and exceptional quality examples can become surprisingly valuable. The standard 2-cent Carmen stamp may sell for modest amounts depending on its condition, but collectors know that the small details can make a huge difference. One of the most famous varieties associated with this issue is the cap on the left 2, catalogued as Scott to 20A, and another variety is the cap on both 2s, Scott to 20C. These varieties can be considerably more valuable than an ordinary example. Auction records show just how impressive the difference can be. A rare to 20 example in exceptional mint never hinged condition sold for around $2,500, while a specialized 220C example in superb condition sold for around $1,200. Even more spectacularly, a rare mint never hinged plate block containing the cap on left 2 variety sold for approximately $9,500. These prices demonstrate an important rule of stamp collecting: rarity and condition can be much more important than denomination. A 2-cent stamp does not necessarily mean a $2 or 2-cent value today. It could be worth a few dollars as an ordinary used example, hundreds of dollars as a high-grade or scarce variety, or thousands of dollars when it is an exceptional variety or rare multiple. When examining an 1892 cent Washington, collectors should use magnification and carefully study the numbers, margins, perforations, color, gum, cancellation, and overall centering. The cap varieties can be easy to miss if you do not know exactly what you are looking for, which is why experienced collectors often use specialized catalogs and comparison images. Condition is also critical. A stamp with bright original color, clean paper, strong perforations, excellent centering, and original gum can be dramatically more desirable than one with creases, tears, stains, thinning, disturbed gum, or poor centering. If you believe you have one of the scarce varieties, do not try to improve the stamp yourself. Cleaning, regumming, trimming, or repairing an old stamp can destroy its collector value. Instead, preserve it carefully and consider professional certification. The 1892 cent Washington is a perfect example of the excitement of philately because the difference between an ordinary stamp and a valuable variety may be hidden in a tiny detail. So next time you find an old Washington stamp in a family album, do not simply look at the 2-cent denomination and move on. Examine the design, study the numbers, check the condition, and look for varieties. You may discover something far more interesting than you expected. Thank you for watching Stamps Us. If you enjoy rare stamps, old American postal history, valuable varieties, and hidden treasures, subscribe to Stamps Us and stay with us for more fascinating discoveries.